Here's a number that should terrify you if you ever plan to gamble again. On a single roulette spin, the casino's advantage is roughly 5.26%. That sounds small. It sounds like nothing. It sounds like the kind of number you'd ignore on a nutrition label. But run that number across 100,000 spins a night, every night for 40 years, and that tiny percentage becomes a foundation. Not a foundation of concrete and steel, a foundation of math. Casinos are not in the business of luck. They're in the business of certainty. And that is the part nobody tells you when they picture the neon, the free drinks, the high rollers, the fantasy of owning the house that always wins. Because here's the paradox. The house always wins. Everyone knows that. It's practically a proverb. And yet somehow casinos still go bankrupt, constantly, spectacularly. Billions of dollars gone in buildings that were mathematically guaranteed to print money. If the edge is real, if the math is bulletproof, how does anyone lose owning one of these things? That question is the whole story. Stick around because by the end of this, you will understand exactly why a business engineered to never lose a bet can still lose everything. Let's start with the fantasy, because everyone has it. You picture yourself owning a casino the way you'd own a golden goose. Money walks in the door voluntarily. People hand you cash to lose it. You don't have to convince anyone to buy anything. They come to you, they sit down, and they pay for the privilege of losing. It feels like the closest thing to a printing press that's still technically legal. And for decades, the industry sold that fantasy hard. Frank Sinatra owned a piece of the Sands. Howard Hughes bought up half the Las Vegas Strip like he was collecting stamps. Every generation has its version of the businessman who looked at a casino and thought, that's not a business, that's a machine that manufactures money out of thin air. The machine is real. That part isn't a lie. The house edge is a mathematical certainty, not a marketing trick. Every game on the floor is built with a permanent bias toward the operator. Blackjack, when played with perfect strategy, gives the house an edge of well under 1%. Roulette sits around 2.7% on a European wheel, over 5% on the American wheel with its extra zero. Slot machines, the real workhorses of the industry, run anywhere from 2% to 15%. And on the lower end of the machine hierarchy, in penny slots and low-denomination games, that number climbs even higher. None of this depends on cheating. Nobody needs to rig anything. The rules of the games themselves are the rig, hiding in plain sight, printed right there on the felt for anyone willing to do the arithmetic. Multiply that edge by volume and you start to understand why this industry exists at all. A single slot bank pulling in $100,000 a day at a 10% hold generates $10,000 in pure gross gaming revenue before a single other expense is considered. Multiply that by hundreds of machines, thousands of hands of blackjack, and millions of individual bets a year, and the theoretical math stops being theoretical. It becomes a river, a predictable, physics-like river of cash that keeps flowing whether the casino is lucky or unlucky on any given Tuesday night. This is where you need your first piece of insider vocabulary because the industry does not talk about profit the way you think it does. They talk about drop and hold. Drop is the total amount of cash and credit that crosses the table or gets fed into a machine. Hold is the percentage of that drop the casino actually keeps after paying out winners. A casino can have enormous drop and still have a miserable hold percentage if the players get lucky that week. This is why casino floors are covered in cameras and pit bosses are trained to watch hold like hawks. It's not paranoia, it's inventory control in an industry where the inventory is other people's luck. And here's the part the movies never show you. The games are almost a footnote to the actual business model. In a modern integrated resort, gaming can represent well under half of total revenue. Rooms, food, beverage, entertainment, retail, nightlife, all of it stacked around the casino floor like scaffolding, often generating more money combined than the slots and tables themselves. Food and beverage operations typically run profit margins in the 25 to 30% range. Hotel rooms bring in their own margin on top of that. Nightclubs and VIP lounges can produce profit margins as high as 40 or 50% because the actual cost of vodka and a velvet rope is nothing compared to what people will pay to feel important for one night. The casino floor isn't the whole business anymore, it's the bait. Everything else is the trap. Which brings us to comps, the second piece of vocabulary you need, and maybe the strangest one. A comp is a complimentary reward, a free room, a free meal, a free show ticket, handed to a gambler based on their theoretical value to the house. Casinos don't give these away out of generosity. They calculate them with the same coldness as an insurance actuary. If a blackjack player is betting $100 a hand at 60 hands an hour with a 1% house edge, that player generates a theoretical loss of $60 an hour, whether they actually lose that hour or not. The casino will then allocate somewhere between 30 and 40% of that theoretical loss back to the player in the form of comps. It looks like a gift. It is actually a discount on a bet the house has already mathematically won. The whale in the high roller suite eating a free lobster dinner isn't beating the system. He's paying full price. He just doesn't know what full price looks like.
So, if the math is this favorable, if every single number points toward inevitable profit, why does this industry have one of the highest failure rates in American commercial real estate? Why do casino projects collapse under their own weight with a regularity that would embarrass most other industries? Because the house edge only protects you from gambler's luck. It does nothing to protect you from debt, from timing, from ego, and from the sheer scale of money required to build one of these things in the first place. Consider Revel in Atlantic City. In 2012, a $2.4 billion casino resort opened on the boardwalk, the tallest building in the city, backed with hopes that it would single-handedly revive a struggling gambling market. It had over 1,800 hotel rooms, it had celebrity headliners at its opening, and it made a series of decisions that, in hindsight, read like a case study in ignoring your own customer. Management banned smoking entirely on the gaming floor, alienating a huge share of traditional gamblers. There was no players club at launch, no loyalty rewards program, the exact kind of comp system that keeps regulars coming back. There was no buffet, no bus tours bringing day trippers in from Philadelphia and New York the way older Atlantic City casinos had relied on for decades. Room rates and restaurant prices were set for a Wall Street clientele that, thanks to the financial crisis unfolding around the property's construction, had far less appetite for lavish spending than it did 5 years earlier. 1 month after opening, the casino floor brought in just $13 million in gaming revenue, near the bottom of the entire Atlantic City market. It never recovered. Revel filed for bankruptcy less than a year after opening, filed again a year after that, and closed permanently just over 2 years after its grand opening, having never once turned a profit. The building that cost $2.4 billion to construct eventually sold for a small fraction of that. The house edge never mattered. The house never even got the chance to grind it out over decades because the debt came due before the math could work in its favor.
Then there's Fontainebleau in Las Vegas, a different flavor of the same disease. Construction began in 2007 on a $3 billion resort on the North Strip, a 68-story tower designed to be one of the most ambitious builds in the city's history. By late 2008, the hotel tower had topped off. The project was roughly 70% complete, and then the 2008 financial crisis arrived in full force. The banks financing construction pulled back, the developer sued, and in June of 2009, the project filed for bankruptcy with construction halted mid-build. For over a decade, a partially finished 68-story skyscraper sat on the Las Vegas Strip, an empty blue glass monument to a business plan that assumed credit would always be available on the same terms it was available the year the project broke ground. Investor Carl Icahn eventually bought the stalled property for roughly $150 million, a number that sounds enormous until you remember the thing had already absorbed close to $3 billion before a single guest ever checked in. The tower didn't fail because the games inside it had bad odds. It failed because it was financed like a bet on permanent economic conditions, and economic conditions are never permanent. It would take until 2023, under new ownership, for the resort to finally open its doors as the Fontainebleau Las Vegas, roughly 18 years after the project was first announced. 2 case studies, 2 different cities, 2 different decades, the exact same lesson. The house edge guarantees that gamblers lose to the casino over time. It guarantees nothing about whether the casino survives long enough for that math to matter. A casino doesn't compete against its customers. It competes against its own balance sheet. against interest payments on 9- and 10-figure construction loans, against regulatory costs that can run into the hundreds of millions just to secure a gaming license in a competitive jurisdiction, against the brutal reality that a gaming floor generating steady, boring, predictable profit for 30 years is worth infinitely more than a spectacular one that runs out of cash in its second year chasing an image instead of a customer base. This is the part the fantasy never accounts for. You are not really in the business of games. You are in the business of debt service, disguised as entertainment. Every dollar of house edge you grind out of a slot machine has to first outrun the interest payment on the loan that built the building the slot machine sits in. Every comp you hand out has to be smaller than the theoretical loss it's discounting, or you're bleeding money while looking generous. Every square foot of casino floor is competing against every other square foot in your own resort for the highest possible revenue per visitor, because the house edge on the blackjack table means nothing if the hotel above it is half empty, and the restaurant beside it is losing money on every plate served.
So here is the final balance sheet. On one side, a mathematically guaranteed advantage on every single bet placed, compounding over millions of transactions. An edge so reliable that no gambler, no system, no lucky streak can undo it across a large enough sample. On the other side, billions of dollars in construction debt, recession-sensitive discretionary spending, licensing costs that rival small national budgets, and a customer base whose appetite for losing money gracefully evaporates the moment the broader economy gets nervous. The equation isn't gambler versus casino, it's certainty versus leverage. And leverage, unlike a roulette wheel, does not care about the odds. It only cares about timing. The house always wins against the player. Nobody ever said it always wins against itself.